APS or law enforcement, there's still about 23, 24 cases that go unreported. And with regards to financial exploitation, that number is even higher. For every case that may come to our attention, there are about 44 cases that are not reported. Here in our Lone Star State, in 2019, we received over 118,000 intake reports statewide. And out of those 118,000 reports, over 51,000 were confirmed as valid. So that meant that when we went out to the homes, we did find that there was some type of mistreatment that was occurring. Out of the 118,000, over 16,000 of those cases were reported to us by our community agencies. And the last statistic is something that I'd like to draw y'all's attention to, is that in 2019, Bexar County received over 10,000 intake reports. And I draw that attention to you, not only because that's our county and where we live, but Bexar County seems to come in second place for the highest number of intake reports statewide. First place is always Harris County, and then Bexar County comes in second place for the highest number of intake reports. A little bit about how to report to our agency is we're very fortunate that our legislators take elder abuse very seriously. And Texas is a mandatory reporting state. So the way that the law reads is that anybody that suspects somebody could be in an abusive or being abused, neglected, or financially exploited should immediately report to our department. And the methods to report is we have an abuse hotline at 1-800-252-5400. The other method to report to us is also our texasabusehotline.org. If you're making an online report to us, I would caution and just want to let you know that the online reports, the queue is not monitored as frequently as if you wait on the line and make an online report. And so I know that sometimes there's a little bit of a wait time to actually talk to one of our intake operators, but the moment that you complete the report, the intake specialist will immediately route that report to our local office. So if you need us to get out there sooner rather than later, it's always better to wait on the line and let the intake specialist take all the information down. And as always, if you feel that the individual's in a crisis or in an emergency state, please call 911 because our first responders can always get out there faster than we can. When making a report to our department, the law also states that we will accept anonymous reports. So you don't have to leave your name when you make the report. Our intake specialists will usually try to ask for your name and number, and that's primarily because that helps the assigned APS specialist who's going to go out to the home to be able to have the reporter's contact information in case we need to get clarifying information. And the law, I also want to state that we are never allowed to reveal who reported to our agency. The only time we would ever reveal the reporter's name is that if we were testifying in a court of law and the judge specifically asked us to reveal the reporter's name. And all of the judges across Texas are very aware of the reporting standard, and they never usually will ever ask us to reveal the reporter's name in any of the hearings that we attend. If you do have to make a call and report to our department, our intake specialists will ask many questions. And please keep in mind that if you don't know the answers, you can just say, I don't know, and they'll move on to the next question. But at a minimum, these bullet points on this slide are very, very helpful to get the bare minimum of information that we need to help us get a good intake report. But the name, if you know the date of birth and the current address of the older adult or the individual with disability is helpful. A brief description about the situation, what you were told or what you might have witnessed, would be as many details as you can provide us is very helpful. Details about the alleged perpetrator. Alleged perpetrator is what we use in our terminology, but the alleged perpetrator is who the individual who may be mistreating the older adult or the individual with disability is what we would call our alleged perpetrator. Any current injuries and medical conditions, if you're aware of that, that's very helpful to us. Any names and phone numbers of relatives, neighbors, and friends that may have knowledge about the situation is also helpful to us. And I did cover the reason why we asked for the reporter's contact and information. Adult Protective Services operates under several statutes, and when we are conducting our investigations and we're providing our investigations, we're mandated to do our work, and we're very accountable for the type of work that we do. And so Chapter 48 of the Human Resources Code and the Texas Administrative Code are the main laws that we always refer to on a daily basis, because that's what guides our policies and procedures and the different ways that we take our actions. Other laws that we use are also the Social Security Act, Title 20, as well as the Health and Safety Code. In some of our cases when we're coordinating services for the individuals that we're serving. The eligibility criteria for our program is, in 2012, we had some big changes to our program, and we looked at our eligibility criteria. So anybody who's over the age of 65 is automatically qualified for Adult Protective Services, and we will automatically take all of those cases. Where we had changes to our procedures was the 18 to 64 population. So when we look at the individuals that we're serving who are 18 to 64, we look at individuals who have a mental, physical, or developmental disability that substantially impairs their ability to provide adequately for their care or protection. So when we're looking at substantial disability, substantial impairment, I don't expect you all to know this definition. And please know that if you're concerned about somebody, please call in the intake and we'll make this determination. The reason I like to cover it when I'm giving presentations is because if you ever hear of Adult Protective Services not accepting an intake, it might be because the individual did not meet the criteria for substantial disability. So when we're looking at the substantial disability, it's when the disability grossly or chronically diminishes an adult's physical or mental ability to live independently or provide for their self-care as determined through observation, a diagnosis, an evaluation, or assessment. And the disability must cause a long-lasting and considerable inability to live independently or provide for their own self-care. So when I talk about self-care and their ability to live independently, we're looking at if an individual is having difficulties shopping, cooking, getting their medications, if they're not able to arrange their own services, or if they are not able to make sound decisions, or they're not capable of preventing harm to themselves or others, that person is what we would be looking at as somebody who might be substantially impaired. So next, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our investigative process and how we conduct our investigations. So the APS program is responsible for investigating abuse, neglect, and exploitation for individuals who reside out in the community. And these include all of the private homes, adult foster homes, unlicensed boarding care homes, or any homes that have 3 or fewer individuals living in a home. And the unlicensed homes are sometimes where the community, it gets a little bit confused, but our sister agency, the Health and Human Services Commission, the regulatory division, is responsible for conducting the investigations in all the licensed assisted living facilities and nursing home investigations. When Adult Protective Services gets involved, the types of individuals that we look at with regards to individuals who might be harming our clients, we look at paid caretakers, unpaid caretakers, family members, and there has to be an ongoing relationship with our alleged victims. And the different types of allegations that we look at in Adult Protective Services is we look at abuse. And with regards to abuse, we'll look at physical abuse, sexual abuse, and verbal emotional abuse. And with regards to neglect, neglect comes under 2 categories. We'll look at self-neglect and also caretaker neglect. And we look at physical neglect, medical neglect, and mental health neglect. And we also investigate financial exploitation. Often when we begin our investigations, and what we see in Adult Protective Services is that when we see one form of abuse that's occurring, we often find, because when we do begin our investigations, we'll look at the individual situation in their entirety. And what we often find is when there's one form of abuse that's occurring, there are other forms of abuse that may be co-occurring at the same time. So for example, sometimes we may be called in because the case is neglect. And let's say the individual is having difficulties paying for their utility bills. Well, as we go in and we start talking with our alleged victim, we'll start asking about their finances and asking why, they've fallen behind on their utility bills. And sometimes what we start learning is that we learn that there's a caretaker or a family member that has recently moved in and is taking money away from them. And in some cases, not only are they taking the money away from them, they may be threatening them and saying, you better give me this money. And so that's when we start seeing some financial exploitation occurring, and then the threats that they have to give the money over to them. So there may be some verbal emotional abuse that's occurring. A little bit about the investigative process and how we conduct our investigations is I spoke to you all about the statewide intake and how to report to our department. So making the report is the first step in getting us involved. Once a report is made, our intake specialist will assign a priority to the case. And the priorities are, we have 4 priorities in adult protective services, and the priorities will mandate our face-to-face timeframes. So priority 1 cases, we have to, will be initiating our face-to-face contact with the alleged victim within 24 hours. Priority 2 cases, we go out within 3 days. Priority 3 cases, we have up to 7 days to make our face-to-face. And then priority 4 cases, we have up to 14 days. Now, keep in mind, those are only our face-to-face time frames. What I'd like to draw your attention to is the next box that says case initiation, 24 hours. The way that the law reads is that within 24 hours, we have to begin all of our investigations. And that is closely monitored by our department, and something that we hold very, very, our staff highly accountable to. And so the way that the law reads is that within 24 hours that the call is initiated to our department, we will begin our investigations. So if a case is called in at 1:30 today, by 1:29 tomorrow, the caseworker would already have started that investigation by conducting a case initiation either with our alleged victim or with an individual who has current reliable information, so that we can start determining what type of steps we may need to take. Do we need to immediately provide a service for that individual? And that's where we start assessing the individual's situation. As a part of our investigative process, we will interview the alleged victim, the collaterals, and anyone who has knowledge about the situation. We will gather all of the evidence that we need, and then if we do at any point of our investigation, we determine that the individual needs protective services, we will provide those services to the individual right away. So that's why in APS, we say we have a rolling service plan. And we say that we have a rolling service plan because we want to make sure that we immediately provide a service to alleviate any further harm to the individual. In adult protective services, we have certain client rights, and we also look very capacity, and an individual's capacity to make their own decisions is core to our program. And it's one of the most beautiful parts of adult protective services. And for us as who work out in the field, and I know for me personally, when I used to work with my clients, it was one of the hardest things for me, because there were times that I knew I could help an individual, but sometimes our clients wouldn't want to accept our help, and we have to respect that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that right now, so that if you ever feel like you've called Adult Protective Services and we didn't do anything, there's certain reasons why in situations we can't take actions, and it's because we have to respect our clients' wishes. So, in Adult Protective Services, we provide services one of two ways. We can provide the services to our individuals with the person's consent, or we can provide protective services without the individual's consent, only if they meet the definition in the Human Resources Code. And so when the definition and the statute that we look at in APS is that If a person lacks the capacity to consent to receive protective services, if because of a mental or physical impairment, the individual is not capable of understanding the nature of the services that we're trying to offer them, and if they're unable to either agree or to refuse the services that we're offering, then that person may lack the capacity to consent. And so when we feel that an individual does not have the capacity to consent, an APS worker cannot make that decision on their own. And so one of the things that what we will do is that we have to consult with our client's attending physician or with a licensed professional who can make those decisions and tell us about the individual's capacity. And so one of the big things in adult protective services that we always try to do is that we never want to give the appearance that we're doctor shopping. So if an individual lacks capacity, we're going to quickly try to find out the attending physician's name and contact information, and we will always try to go back to the attending physician first. And the reason we do that is because that attending physician has the client's long history, and that doctor would be in the best position to give us their input on the individual's capacity. Sometimes there are situations that physicians tell us, APS, I'd love to help you, but I haven't seen my patient in over 3 months or 6 weeks. If you could bring my patient to the office, I would be happy to give you this statement. And sometimes we will tell the physician, Dr. So-and-so, I'm sorry, but we tried to see if your patient would come in for a visit and they're refusing. We're very concerned for their safety, and we will let the physician know that that we're going to take our doctor out to help us with that determination. So we do have some doctors that we work with that will make those decisions if the attending physician can't make that decision. So with regards to our client rights, these are the client rights that we have to abide by. And so our clients have the right to refuse to cooperate with the investigation, and they also have the right to refuse the services that we're trying to arrange for them. And that's when the individuals have the capacity to make their own decisions. They also have the right to refuse to allow us into their home. All of our clients have the right to participate in the services that we're planning. We cannot arrange any services without our client's permission. And they also have the right to select least restrictive alternatives. And when we get into least restrictive, I'll get into that a little further, but we're always going to look to see what's available out in the community first, and then to try to stabilize that situation. Our clients also have the right to refuse medical treatment based on their religious beliefs, and that is regardless of capacity. We're always going to, honor their religious beliefs. And in our more serious cases, which are not the majority of our cases, but in life-threatening situations, if the individual does not have the capacity to make their decisions, and we have to take a case before court and let the judge make a decision, all of our clients are always going to have an attorney ad litem that will represent them. And I can honestly say that in my years of working with APS, The attorney ad litems are always such strong advocates for the clients that we serve, and they will always, hold us to the task to make sure that we've done everything that we can. And so we're very, very fortunate to have such passionate attorney ad litems here in Bexar County. Next, I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and also what to be on the lookout for. And if you, when I say what to be on the lookout for, is that these are indicators that if you see any of these signs or symptoms, I know it is not easy to pick up the phone and make a report on someone, especially if it's somebody that you know, or it's occurring in your own family or within your circle of friends. But I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you'll understand that all we want to do is try to protect the individual, and all of our clients individuals with disabilities, they have a right to live a good quality of life, and they have rights, and we do not want people to take advantage of them. So when we're looking at abuse, as the way the statute reads, and when we're validating our cases, we have to meet the elements of this definition. And in Adult Protective Services, our cases are closely read, closely monitored by the supervisors to make sure that we have met our preponderance of evidence before we will validate a case. We just don't, we have to have the proof, and we have to have a solid finding before we will determine that a case is valid. We just don't make up our decisions, willy-nilly, or because we don't like somebody. They're based on solid evidence. So with abuse, we're looking at the negligent or willful infliction, unreasonable confinement, intimidation, or cruel punishment resulting in physical or emotional harm or pain to an older adult or a person with disability by their caretaker, family member, or other individual who has an ongoing relationship with the individual. So when we're talking about unreasonable confinement, willful infliction, we're looking at, were there any bruises or burns or unexplained injuries? Often, sometimes, unfortunately, what we see in APS, and perhaps maybe you all have seen it, is that sometimes family members are very good about isolating our clients, or they elicit sympathy. They'll say, please don't, you better not say anything. You better not call the state, or else they're going to put you in a nursing home. Don't call or don't say anything, to anybody about what's happening in this home, because then they're going to put me in jail. And that's how they start taking control of our clients' lives, but sometimes, they will try to take over our client's life, and that's not good either. But with regards to abuse, sometimes we find that caretakers might be running late, or they're in a rush. And while they're bathing an individual, they may have used some unnecessary force. And the unnecessary force might have resulted from a broken arm, or sometimes when they're changing our clients, they may have forced their arm in unnatural positions and caused the arm to snap and break. Or sometimes they're in a rush and they're not taking the time walking an individual to the car, and they push them. Our client falls and has a broken hip. But some things to be on the lookout for is also injuries. If you see that the individual has bruising and you see bruising that's, on the outside of the arm and also the inside of the arm, and the individual is saying, "Oh, I just fell." Well, and they seem scared and they have a deer in the headlight look. That's an indicator something could be going on, because when an individual typically falls, and that's natural, anybody can accidentally trip and fall. But when they fall, usually you'll see the bruising on the outside of their arm. But when you see bruising on the outside and the inside of the arm, that should be a red flag that something might be going on. And typically, when you see the bruising on the inside of the arm, it's where they were grabbing the individual, with force. Indicators of verbal emotional abuse is the threats of harm, intimidating them, yelling, screaming, calling them bad names, threatening them. "You better not say anything or I'll snap your neck." Throwing things around the house, holes in the walls where individuals are angry. Those are, where the individual is afraid of the caretaker, the family member that they're living with. Another indicator might be if you're ever working with an older adult or a client in the home, or you're talking to a friend and you're having a very natural conversation. The family member or the caretaker comes home and all of a sudden they just stop talking or they seem afraid. That's another indicator that something might be going on. Neglect is one of the highest forms of cases that we receive in the department. It's about 80 to 85% of our cases. And when we're looking at neglect, we're looking at the failure to provide for oneself the goods or services, including medical services, which are necessary to avoid physical or emotional harm, pain, or the failure of a caretaker to provide such goods or services. So earlier, when I showed you the three, when I covered the allegations that we look at in APS, again, I just want to remind you, neglect falls under either self-neglect when an individual lives alone, and we also look at caretaker neglect. Some of the indicators of neglect might be malnutrition, dehydration, or poor hygiene. And sometimes there's an evidence of inadequate care. The caretaker might not be getting our client water. They may go to work, and let's say we have an individual who recently had surgery and they need help with their meals. They need help cooking because they're weak and they're not able to do that. And they're leaving our alleged victims at home alone with no food, no water all day. Sometimes we find individuals who are living in unsafe, unsanitary living conditions. Sometimes people fall into states of depression, or maybe something in their life has changed, and they're not able to get around as easily as they once did, and they don't know that there's help out there, so their home starts to become very unsafe. They may need ramps so that they can get in and out of their homes. Often other neglect indicators that we see in APS is over-medicating in our alleged victims, or sometimes under-medicating. And so when we look at the medication process, sometimes we have to really, consult with physicians, and with our clients to find out what's going on. And in some of the cases that we look at, we find caretakers or family members that might be giving our alleged victims more medication that they need because they don't want them wandering from the home. So they'll give them a lot of medication so that they're sleeping all day. And that's never a good thing because those medications need to be prescribed as a physician stated. And the over-medicating, is also not good because there are a lot of services that are available that we can try to connect our clients with so that they can live a good quality of life. And sometimes, again, we have individuals that don't want to help let our clients sign up for the services because they don't want individuals knowing what's going on in the home. And so that's why we always, as a part of our process, we will look at the medications and talk with our clients about what's going on. Some of the behavioral indicators and what to be on the lookout for is if you're working with individuals who had a good quality of life, or had services in the home, or were also going out, to the senior centers or to day activity centers, participating in programs like this, and all of a sudden they withdraw from the services all of a sudden, and they seem fearful, or they're very anxious, or their behavior has changed. That's a cause for concern. The refusal or reluctance to talk in the presence of the caretaker, disorientation or confusion is also concerning. Again, because that disorientation, maybe they're giving the individual too much medication. Why is there confusion going on? Is there a medical reason for the confusion? Or are they being possibly over-medicated? Sometimes we work with individuals who are nonverbal in adult protective services. And if we get reports, and as a part of our process in looking at records and talking with professionals about our clients, if there's an increase in agitation, that's very concerning to us. And sometimes that's a cue that we need to do something more to protect the individual. Because we had a case that we were working on, and what we had found was we had the individual had a guardian, and the guardian had to, eventually in the end, had to limit the proposed ward's mother from coming in to visit. And the reason that the guardian had to ultimately make that decision was because every time the mother would go and visit the individual at the facility, our client's anxiety, and she would become very agitated after the visits. And so after carefully working with the treatment team and looking at the notes, we were able to determine that it was only after the mother would visit that the agitation would increase. And so in order to help the individual from having to take more medication, to decrease that agitation, the guardian made the decision that the mother could no longer visit with the client alone. And so from this point moving forward, the visits were always going to be supervised. But so that's where I say that, we really have to look at what's going on with that individual. And once the visits were supervised, the agitation had decreased and our client would do just fine. And so, again, when we make decisions, we always have to consider the safety first. And a lot of times in adult protective services, we will involve the licensed professionals working with our clients to help guide our decisions. Other behavioral indicators to be on the lookout for are contradictory statements. And often this is what we see in adult protective services is the contradictory statements. The client might tell, I know we have some Meals on Wheels staff on board. They may report something to Meals on Wheels staff. Then we'll go and interview the home health agency if there's a home health agency involved. And then there's a different explanation for how the injuries occurred. And then we'll interview our alleged victim. And then there's another story how the injuries occurred. And so what we have to do is really get to the root cause of what's going on. And that's often what we'll see when we're conducting our investigations. And often, sometimes, our clients will give the contradictory statements because they're afraid and they don't want to get the family members in trouble, or they're afraid to speak out from the agency. So when I talked about, that we protect with purpose, passion, and persistence, is that sometimes we will be the bad guys or seen as the bad guys for the clients, and we will be, work with them and advocate for them to get to the truth so that they can live a good quality of life, because there's always a way that if working together that we can come up with a good plan to prevent future harm to the individual that we're serving. When we look at exploitation, unfortunately, exploitation and all the scams and fraud, it seems like these fraudsters and scammers and exploitation, these individuals are always 2 steps ahead of us. But the one thing that I can say is that since I started with the department in the early 90s to now, the one wonderful thing is that there is a much stronger collaboration with adult protective services, our financial institutions, and law enforcement to hold people accountable. And in October is Financial Exploitation Awareness Month. And we do a lot of outreach during that month. And we have a campaign that says, if it's not your money, it's a crime. And our older adults control the largest percentage of this nation's wealth. And so we have to, work as a team effort to try to protect our clients from being financially exploited. And when we look at financial exploitation, it's the illegal or improper act or process of a caretaker, family member, or other individual who has an ongoing relationship with our older adult or person with disability, using the resources of an older adult or a person with disability for their monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain without the informed consent of the older adult or person with disability. So, those are the elements that we look at when we're working our financial exploitation cases. Earlier, I mentioned that financial exploitation cases were more underreported. I said that for every case that came to our attention, there are 44 cases that do not come to our attention. And often what we see is that when individuals have been financially exploited, it's devastating to the clients that we serve. And the impact, is very hard, and our clients take it very hard. Often, they feel ashamed that this happened to them. It's a loss of their resources. In some instances, it may lead to a loss of independence. And why I encourage you all to please call us is because, when we have somebody who is being financially exploited, we have to work even faster to protect those individuals' resources. Because we don't want all of their life savings or their savings account or their to be depleted. It can lead to an increase of mental health issues because individuals are depressed when they've lost their life savings or their home was taken away from them. It can lead to an inability to pay for the expenses. That's why I say it could lead to a loss of independence. Sometimes our individuals could age in place because they had the financial means to pay for the services. Sometimes, and if nobody calls us so that we can help the individual and we don't know about it, it could lead to the loss of their resources. And that's why it's so important to please call us. In some situations, our alleged victims can't hire an attorney to pursue the legal protections and remedies. And that's another reason why this is so devastating. Some of the indicators to be on the lookout for is if you're working with an individual and the individual says they don't know what's going on with their finances. They never get to see their financial statements. That's a cue that something could be going on. An individual always has a right to know what's going on with their finances. If they talk about sudden changes in their banking account, or they see that there's a lot of money being withdrawn, they're getting mail with credit card statements, accounts that are being opened in their name. That's a cue that something might be going on. If they make an outcry that they're missing funds or valuables, that's an indicator something could be going on. Other indicators might be providing substandard care. Individuals who are having unpaid bills despite having enough money. The sudden appearance of previously uninvolved relatives. Sometimes what we often see is that these relatives want to protect their inheritance. And so that's why they're not allowing our clients to continue to participate, paying for the services, or they feel they can do a better job taking care of the individual, and they stop all the services because they want to protect their inheritance, and they want to claim rights to the possessions. But it's not right, and they don't have a right to take over the individual's life and their estates and their financials. Some of the indicators of alleged perpetrators, caretakers, or family members who may not have our client's best interests. If they prevent the client from speaking or seeing visitors, that's a cue that something could be going on. Often what we see is there's a lack of affection towards the clients that we're serving when we're working our cases. As I mentioned earlier, they may stop the services because they say they're going to take care of the individual. But what ends up happening is that they're not taking care of the individual and they're letting them go without. An individual who might have been bathed daily by the home health agency with some assistance, may not be getting that bath by the family members because they just don't care. You know, it's too much work. You know, they may not be feeding them because, you know, they're not hungry, so they're not going to give our clients their 3 meals or tend to them as they need be. In some of the families that we work with, there's a history of substance abuse, criminal behavior, or there's a history of family violence that may escalate, that leads to some abuse that's going on in that home. Or often there's an anger or aggressive behavior towards our clients. Other things to be on the lookout for, and what we often see when we're working our cases, you know, is again, the individual, the perpetrator may give conflicting accounts of incidents when we start questioning, and they'll start giving the conflicting accounts because when we interview our alleged perpetrators, they never know what evidence we've collected. So when we start our line of questioning and they say one thing and then we have evidence that contradicts that, then that's when their stories start to unravel because they can't keep up with the lies that they've done. Like, for example, they may say, well, I use my parents' money to pay the utility bills, and I purchase their medications, and I pay for their insurance, and purchase groceries. And so we'll carefully document that, and then we'll ask, because they don't know, and we'll explain, well, according to some of the records we've collected, we're starting to see that your parents have some accounts. We see some withdrawals that were done for Best Buy. Can you tell us why $2,000 was spent at Best Buy on such and such date? And then they get the deer in the headlight look. And they start stumbling. Well, it was for a big screen TV. Okay. Well, can you tell me, you said you bought a 70-inch big screen TV for your parents. When we conducted our home visit, we did not see that 70-inch screen. Can you tell us where it is? And they're like, oh, well, they said that it was a gift for me. And, you know, so that's when we say that there starts to be the conflicting accounts of incidents. Often when we'll see, other things that we'll see is that they'll blame the client for their actions. Well, I had to give my mother more medication so that she wouldn't wander. And then we'll explain, okay, I understand that that's what you're saying, but can you tell me why you chose to take your mother out of attending the day activity center and where she was getting the care and being supervised during the day? And then they'll come up with an excuse for that. So again, I guess the bottom line that I wanted to get to you all today is that if something doesn't feel right, you know, and these red flags are out there, please call us because we have to go in and try to figure out what's going on to make sure the individual's safe. So in talking about our services is that the services are always going to be focused. We're going to develop a service plan that will reduce or eliminate future risk or harm. And the client, we will always work with our clients and to determine the best course of action for them. And we will always secure their input, like I had talked to you about, as their client rights. Earlier when I talked about from least restrictive to most restrictive, we're always going to look at what's available out in the community. Will involve family, friends, and neighbors if they're reliable family, friends, and neighbors. we're gonna try to set up services. One of the things that I know when I was working with my clients, if my clients were refusing everything, the one thing I always tried to connect my clients with was the Meals on Wheels, because I knew if I could at least have somebody deliver a meal daily to them, if that client were to fall, into crisis in the future, I always knew that the Meals on Wheels staff would reach out to our agency again. But we're always going to try to help bring the services in to keep the individuals as safe as possible. We can purchase life-sustaining medications. We will work with our clients, and to keep them at home for as long as possible. But in some situations, if individuals need to be placed, as you'll see, that's further down our continuum. And when we have to start looking at placement, again, we're going to go with medical professionals' input along with our clients. And we're always going to try to connect them with the least restrictive alternative as far as placement goes. If a doctor is telling us the individual needs more supervision, then we're going to see, can we involve the family and friends to help come in and take care of the individual? Can we involve agencies to come in and help, and then we have the individual's needs met? If there's not enough support out in the community and the individual needs to be placed somewhere, then we're going to look at, again, least restrictive. Can the individual be placed in an assisted living facility versus a skilled nursing facility? Because if the individual can be placed in a safe assisted living facility that's more like a home, then that's a better outcome, and sometimes that will make our client happier. So that's what we're going to try to do. When we start having to look at our legal interventions and guardianship, those are our more restrictive alternatives. And guardianship is what we would consider the most restrictive alternative, because if we take a case to court and we make the referral to the HHSC guardianship program, and the judge hears the case, and if the person is adjudicated incapacitated through the court of law, it takes away all of their rights. And that's not what we like to do. But in some cases, if we have an individual who might have a dementia diagnosis and they're being mistreated or they're being taken advantage, we have to protect that individual. And so we cannot validate, somebody taking advantage of them, and we have to protect them. So,
Lisa,
yes.
I had a question. Amanda wants to know, can you explain the APS PCS funds? Is that purchasing medications, or can it be other things as well?
Yes, Amanda, I think that's a very good question. I got worried because I'm seeing that I'm close to an hour. The services that we can do in Adult Protective Services is, I could probably spend an hour on the different services, but we can purchase life-sustaining medications. We can purchase home health services. We can pay for utilities. If an individual is in an abusive situation and they want to relocate somewhere else, if we need to place somebody, for example, in a hotel for a few days until we can secure another place for them to go to, then we may pay for that. And then we may help try to find them an apartment. and then, maybe help with the first month's rent. In some situations, if an individual had a family member that they evicted out of their home and they were afraid and they needed to get the locks changed to their home, we may pay for the locksmith to go out to the home to get the locks changed. In some situations, again, because we're real big on having people age in place, ramps. If an individual needs to get a ramp so that they can get in and out of their home, we may choose to find a provider who could help build a ramp so that the individual has that ability to get out of the home safely and be escorted to medical appointments or to social events or to the grocery store. Other things we might do, when I talk about PCS funds, that's Purchase Client Service dollars, and Adult Protective Services has specific funds set aside where we will purchase a service and then for a temporary basis, and then we'll be making a referral to our sister agencies who can take care of the client on a long-term basis. So an example of that might be, we might find an individual living out in the community who maybe had a stroke recently, and they have paralysis on the left side, and they are now going to need help in the home with, bathing and grooming and maybe some meal preparation. So one of the things that we might do is that APS would come in and put some services through a home health agency for a couple of weeks, and we'll authorize that service so that the individual will be able to transition home safely, be well taken care of. Then what we might do is, after we've arranged for that service, the worker will immediately also make a referral to the Health and Human Services Commission, the long-term service supports, to get see if the individual will qualify for a provider. So while HHSC is trying to make their determination and determine whether the individual will be eligible for the services, we have our services in place. The minute we're notified that HHSC, the individual is qualified for the service, and HHSC is going to come in, then we will stop our services and HHSC will continue the services on a long-term basis. Does that give you a better idea, Amanda? Or I think it was Amanda that asked the question.
Yes, it was, and she said, "Wonderful, thank you very much."
Okay, and I can't possibly go through every single resource because it's just the bottom line is that we will always tailor the services based to the individual's need. In some situations, if also we might do a slight minor home repair for our clients, if it means that they will be able to stay in that home longer, or prevent them from falling into a state of neglect. For an example of that might be a client of ours needs a water heater, and they're bathing in real cold water. Or they just stop bathing because it's too cold for them. Well, if we are alerted to that, that case could be opened up for neglect because the individual was called in for poor hygiene. And when we go in, we find out, and the client is embarrassed to tell us, but they disclose that the reason that they haven't been able to bathe was because it's too cold and they can't carry the warm water, because they were trying to boil the water and to take a warm bath. Well, we may pay for a plumber to go in and put a new water heater so that they will be able to take showers. So it really will depend upon their situation and the service that we provide for them. And I add, thank you for asking that because again, it just shows that APS is here to help, and we want people to stay at home. We don't want to see them having to leave their home.
Lisa,
so,
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So if you have somebody who has been, a request has been put in for you to investigate, and do you find that I'm thinking for young adults with disabilities, do you find that they make excuses for the person that cares for them when you approach and ask them, you know, about finances or why they're not being bathed? Are they making excuses for the people, the family members that are taking care of them?
Sometimes, yes, they are, Sheila, and that's some of the part where I said where the client rights is one of the most beautiful parts of our program, and sometimes the most heartbreaking for us, because sometimes we can tell something is wrong, and sometimes our clients, they will not tell us the truth and what's going on. And we can try to probe and look into the situation and get to the bottom of it, but it takes the courage of the client to come out and tell us the truth about what's happening in that home, so that we can advocate for them. And in some situations, they are just reluctant, or they feel bad, or they're living in fear, and they don't want to turn the family member in, or they're ashamed to disclose that this is happening to them. And I always, ask individuals to please, don't give up on calling us, because sometimes it takes our clients 2 or 3 times before of us going out, before they'll decide to disclose what's really happening in that home. And sometimes they may not, but eventually what we see, and I did have a video clip where an individual kind of gave this testimonial where the situation becomes more than what they can handle, and they will eventually turn to us for help. And that's why I always ask, to please call back the case back in, even if it seems like we didn't do anything the first time. Don't give up on us, because sometimes we know that there could be something going on. And in some situations, to add on to this a little bit more, and to add on to this, Sheila's, one time I had a individual that I was working with, and the individual was pushed and mistreated by a family member. And the family member was badly injured, and the individual I was working with was a male. And I was younger back then, and I knew it was hard for him to admit that the son had done this to him, had hurt him. And when I was also at the time that, because of the injuries that had happened to the individual, law enforcement was immediately notified, and I was in touch with law enforcement, and they were concerned for the individual's safety as well, because they were not sure that they were going to be able to keep the son in jail for an extended time, and law enforcement asked that I please do everything I can to help the client. And so I went on a limb, and I just I explained to my client, because my client was refusing everything from me, and he was so vulnerable. And I gave my last effort, and I said, "Sir," I said, the state of Texas has to protect you. And I am concerned that your son is going to be afraid, upset that he was taken to jail. And how about you come and let me put you in a safe place to live for a few days while your son, gets over his anger." And it was at that point, that the individual just kind of broke down, and he accepted my help, but it was just, I don't know if it was just the sheer, but it was my one last ditch effort to try to get him to agree to that, to allow me to help him. But all along he was covering, and didn't want to admit it. And so I just used that approach, and he accepted the help. And then that's when he admitted to me that the son had mistreated him, and things. And that helped me to be able to get a strong statement from him that he was pushed and mistreated by the son. And it also helped me to when he accepted the help. So I hope that kind of explained, Sheila, that sometimes, yes, we know that something might be going on, but if they refuse to tell us or refuse to accept our help, there's not much we can do. And that's why, especially in those instances, is why I always liked Meals on Wheels involved, because I knew that at least there was somebody who would go and check on that client daily when they would deliver the meal.
Okay. And so with that being said, if you have like Meals on Wheels, or for instance, our organization, and we can get them to admit to us, but they won't admit to you, what is the next step that our Meals on Wheels people can do, or any other organization that is working with disability community or seniors?
Well, sometimes, like I said, if the individual has the capacity to make their decisions, and if they do not want to get out of the situation, there may not be much any of us can do, because we have to respect their right to make that decision. And so sometimes it just becomes a game where we just have to wait and see what happens in the future. But eventually, like I said, something is going to happen in that person's life where either they can no longer handle it, or they just get tired of living in that situation, and they'll eventually accept the help. And I'm not sure that that's the answer that you all want to hear, but that's just the way that it goes. The only way that we could intervene, in a situation like that might be is if the individual lost the capacity to make their own decisions. And it would be at that point that we could step in to intervene to protect them. Does that make sense?
It does. Because that's where we tend to run into a lot of problems, and I'm sure the Meals on Wheels organization probably sees a lot of that as well.
And
especially when it's family.
Yes, it's unfortunate, but it's just so hard. It's really, really hard. But the best thing that we can just all keep doing is, when an individuals who refuse all of our services, is what we will do is we will try a couple of times going back, But eventually, if they just flat out refuse to make any decision, we might have to assign a finding of unable to determine what's going on in that case, and then we have to close it if they refuse all of our help. But we will try to leave them with services before we close our case. And we always remind the individuals that if they feel they need our help in the future, they can call our hotline. Oh, what was that? Did you all have a question?
I was just going to say, okay. Does anybody have any questions right now? Okay.
So I know I've talked a lot about what to be on the lookout for, and you know, and this seems like a problem so huge, like what can really be done. And so I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the collaborative efforts that are going on statewide and here in our community. But a lot of our collaborative efforts is we try to do reach out to the community, and anytime that that we're asked to give presentations like to this wonderful group, we will go out of our way to try to make all invitations to present, to learn more about our program. We have been really collaborating in our joint investigations. Judge Vasquez and Senator Menendez have started a Bexar County Elder Abuse and Exploitation Task Force here in Bexar County, and they have brought all of the major stakeholders, law enforcement, financial institutions, elder law attorneys, APS, all the different moving parts that investigate elder abuse, so that we can come together and work as a united effort. SAPD, Bexar County Sheriffs, the District Attorney's Office is involved. And so it's very exciting where we're going to try to work more collaboratively together, and also hoping that, you know, our prosecutions will increase in the future, you know, as far as this collaborative relationship between law enforcement and the district attorney's office. We've been doing a lot of training with our financial institutions, and it's been so amazing to see over the years how hard all of the banks work to protect the assets for our individuals with disabilities as well as our older adults. They really have gotten a grasp, and they will work very hard to make sure that that their clients are taken care of. We've been doing, we have multidisciplinary teams that are occurring statewide. And we've been doing a lot of different outreach efforts. Here in our hometown, we have Adult Protective Services has a partnership with WellMed. That's been very exciting to see. They've been doing some research based where they've trained all their physicians on an elder abuse suspicion index where they're screening all their patients. They won a huge national award that was really encouraging and nice to see that was happened here in Bexar County. We have we partner with child advocacy centers now to do our forensic interviews with regards to when we have alleged victims who have been sexually abused. That's very nice, because that way that one interview is shared with APS, law enforcement, and the district attorney. And so it's nice that they will conduct those interviews now, so that our alleged victims only have to be interviewed once instead of having to go through multiple interviews. I've been working with we have a South Texas Adult Protective Services Community Board that we got started, and that's comprised of UT Health Medical School. We have representatives from Catholic Charities, 2 financial institutions, geriatric case management, but they have been doing some really exciting things. We came up with, collaborated and came up with placemats on elder abuse. And I know that since Meals on Wheels is on staff, they were so gracious and donated some of the artwork for the front of the placemat, and then the back had some very helpful numbers and tips on how our older adults can be, what to be on the lookout for with regards to fraud. And then I also, as a part of the board, we started a committee called Silver Sabbath. And the Silver Sabbath Committee has embraced raising awareness about isolation. And it's a combination of our faith-based community coming together with the aging networks that we work with to embrace isolation. And so they have been doing some really neat projects over the past couple of years. And so that's really groundbreaking and unique. I think Bexar County is the only dedicated group that has something like this occurring. And so they're getting ready to do a big webinar it's called Home for the Holidays, Hope for the Holidays, and webinar on November the 19th. And I'll send that out to you, Sheila, in case this group wants to join the Zoom session.
That would be great. I will share that. I'll
make sure and get it out in case they're interesting. But the faith leaders felt like, that they wanted to get a positive message of hope and joy, since most of America and the world is going to have a very different holiday season this year. And for Meals on Wheels staff, they recently joined the Silver Sabbath Committee, and so we're so happy to have them involved with us. So I just want to thank you all for your support. With regards to...
I just want to ask real quick before, because it is 3 o'clock and I know a couple of them are leaving. I want to make sure that everybody, if they have a question, they can answer it before, since we're actually at the ending point. If anybody has any questions in specific that they need to ask Lisa, if you have to leave. Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, I'm almost done. So with regards to this slideshow, it's just what I wanted to show was just to reinforce Adult Protective Services is working closely with law enforcement, and the law mandates that if we suspect a crime has been committed, we must make a referral to law enforcement. And so I will tell you all that Lieutenant Booth with the white collar crimes, he has really been very passionate. Him and also Detective, his name is just Detective Brinkman. We are really fortunate. They both have a very big passion for making sure that our individuals with disabilities and our older adults are protective, and they have been really making strides to working together to come up with solid cases to the best of their ability and getting them over to the district attorney's office so that individuals can be held accountable for the crimes that they're committing. So in closing, I just wanted to say that, the good news is that in San Antonio, it's so important to have, you know, the social supports and policy initiatives in place to address elder abuse. And so, you know, in order to support our older adults and have them age in place, you know, we need all of these different services in place. And I always say that Bexar County is rich in services, and we're so fortunate what we have. But, you know, we have dedicated law enforcement, you know, that are, you know, looking out for these cases and doing everything they can to protect our older adults. You know, we need our faith-based community, you know, and the volunteer base that they bring, you know, to help all of us with the services that we're doing, you know, and all the community agencies as well as state and federal agencies, you know, all of us collaborating together, you know, so that our older adults and individuals can age in place for as long as possible. And if we build a strong social structure around our vulnerable adults and have the different services available to them, then we can help reduce social isolation to help them overcome abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So that pretty much concludes my presentation, and I apologize I went so long, but are there any other questions?
No, ma'am.
Well, I thank you all for your time.
If those who are still on, if you want to get more information, if you want to leave, type in your email in chat. Lisa, I can share your information, I'm assuming.
Yes, of course. Do you have it, or do you want me to check?